Hello everyone and welcome again to lesson 3.2 of CSS series. In our previous lesson we were able to look on the introduction and the syntax of CSS, and we said that the simple syntax for writing CSS is using the selector and then the declaration block. In our today's lesson we want to look at the CSS selectors. So the CSS selectors are used to find and select the HTML elements that you want to apply the styles. And some of the examples of the selectors include the element selector, the ID selector, the class selector, and the universal selector. So let us take time and look at each one of them one by one. The element selector selects an HTML element using the element name. For example, paragraph, anchor tag, or div, or any other HTML element name. And the ID selector, it uses the ID attribute of the HTML element so that it can select a specific element. And the next selector is the class selector. So the class selector selects an element using the class name. We're going to see that in the code. And the last type of the CSS selector is the universal selector. So the universal selector selects all the HTML elements on the page. And the symbol for using universal selector is the asterisk symbol. So with that theory said, let's take a practical example to see the difference between all these four types of CSS selectors. So I'm going to head over to my Visual Studio Code, and this is our previous project that we've built. And in this project I have the about page right here, and in the about page we have added in our previous lesson a symbol CSS style within the head tag using the style tag. And in this style tag is where we define the CSS, and we had written only this one line of CSS to demonstrate the syntax of CSS. Now I want to advance further. When I now open this page in the browser, I'm going to right click on it and open using a live server. And when it opens in the browser, you're going to see that the background color of this page is aquamarine, which we have specified within the style attribute. And again, just to remind you, this format of writing the CSS is what we call the internal format within the style tag. Now what I'm going to do is to demonstrate all these four types of selectors. So let's look at the first selector, which is the element selector. So the element selector selects an element using the element name. And now I want to go back to Visual Studio, and you can see within this HTML code we have different elements. We have the body element, the H1 element, the P element, and so many other elements. So I'm going to select a paragraph element, and I say paragraph, and for the paragraph make the text color be red, and I'm going to save that. So what I've done here, I've selected all the elements in this page and applied this style to all the paragraphs. So now when I go back to my browser, you're going to see that all the paragraph text has been highlighted using the style color red. So this is an example of element selector. We are selecting an element. Instead of saying paragraph here, we can say headers. So maybe heading 1. So here I'm using the paragraph, I'm using the element name directly. So when I save, you're going to see that the text of heading 1 has been changed to red. The next type of selector is the ID selector, and the ID selector uses the element ID attribute. So when do we use this ID? We normally use the ID selector when we want to apply a style only to one specific element. So if you come back in your code, let's say you only want to apply this text color to the first paragraph here. So I can come and say I give this paragraph, or I give this element an ID, and I call it maybe paragraph 1, and then I go back to my styles. Let me remove this style, and I'm going to refer to this paragraph ID name. So I'm going to say, how do we refer an ID name? We use hash and then the name of the ID, and then I'm going to apply the text color, color, and I say red. Now this red color will only be applied to this element with this ID and not the other paragraphs. So when I go back to my browser, you're going to see that the first paragraph has been applied the style red text. The next type of the selector is the class selector. So the class selector is used to select an element using the class name. And when do we use the class selector? We use the class selector when we want to apply the same style to multiple elements. So let us say in our HTML we want to apply this red to the first paragraph and also to the second paragraph. So then we can give them the same class name. So I can say class red paragraphs. You can call them red paragraph. And I go and delete this one, and let me now give it a class, and it should also be the same class name, red paragraph. And now this first paragraph and second paragraph have the same class name. Now when you go back to your styles here within the style block, you are going to refer to a class name. So how do we refer to a class name? We use the dot and then the name of the class. So we call it red paragraph, and then you apply this style color red. Alright, so now when you go back to your browser, you're going to see that this red color has been applied only to the first paragraph and the second paragraph, because we've given them the same class name and then we select them using the class name right here. Alright, the next type of the selector is the universal selector, and the universal selector selects all the HTML elements on the page. So instead of just applying red color to these two paragraphs, I'm going to remove this style, and I'm going to use a universal selector and say everything in this page should have a color red. So what I'm doing here, using the static, I'm able to specify all the elements, including paragraphs, body, headings, and all that. So now when you go back to your browser, you're going to see that all the text, everything has been applied using the red style. Alright, so with that said, I want to pause this session here, and then in our next lesson, we're going to see how to add CSS into HTML document. Alright, otherwise, thank you for joining the lesson, and see you in the next lesson.